Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today is the anniversary of Typhoon Cobra, a major storm that damaged many ships in Third Fleet and caused the deaths of 790 sailors. Typhoon Cobra struck Third Fleet on the night of December 17th into the 18th of 1944. Third Fleet had just finished operations around the Philippine Islands and the whole Battle of Leyte Gulf, which had taken place in October, and was still supporting troops ashore there by attacking Japanese airfields. The fleet was withdrawn about 200 miles east of Luzon, and they began to conduct underway refueling. The small destroyers escorting the fleet had much lower fuel capacities than, say, Battleship New Jersey, which can hold somewhere around 2.4 million gallons, or the other aircraft carriers and large ships, and thus had to be resupplied pretty periodically. In conducting wartime operations, they were operating at speed, zigzagging to avoid submarines, and generally burning more fuel than you would in peacetime. And so many of the ships had only between 10 and 15% of their fuel capacity left on board, many of the destroyers. A Third Fleet at this time is absolutely massive. There are 7 full fleet carriers and another 6 light carriers, 8 fast battleships, over a dozen heavy and light cruisers, and somewhere around 50 destroyers escorting them all. So this fleet would have been far more ships than Admiral Halsey, located here on Battleship New Jersey, could have even seen across the horizon on a good weather day. Like I said, Halsey is in overall command of Third Fleet. Third Fleet is broken down into several different task forces, all operating loosely in the same area, many beyond visual range from each other. Halsey is stationed on Battleship New Jersey. Battleship New Jersey displaces well over 57,000 tons, and even as the weather and seas picked up, this ship remained entirely seaworthy. It wasn't that way for all the ships in the fleet. While some of the destroyers were able to refuel, others were not. Those ships that couldn't refuel were ordered by Halsey to take on seawater as ballast. Halsey had sailed on destroyers before. He knew what their sailing characteristics were. However, some of them had such low fuel capacity that they didn't feel able to take on seawater for fear that would render inoperable those fuel tanks and prevent them from being able to make it back to Ulithi, where the U.S. fleet was operating out of at that time. Halsey's decision to remain on station was not an easy one. He received meteorological reports from Pearl Harbor that suggested the storm was going to move to the north and be over 200 miles away from his fleet. His own meteorologists plotted it taking a more westerly course towards them. Halsey, as he was known to do, took a gamble and remained in the operating area. He was here to fight a war, not the weather god, after all. As it turns out, that gamble did not play out right, and he sailed the fleet directly into the center of Typhoon Cobra. Many of the ships in the fleet ended up damaged. In fact, after the incident, it was said that Third Fleet had received as much damage as if they had just gone through a major engagement. In fact, they probably took more damage than they did during the entire Battle of Leyte Gulf. 3 destroyers were sunk: Hull, Spence, and Monaghan. Spence had been one of the ships unable to refuel or reballast, and thus didn't have a low enough center of buoyancy. And though in the 140 mile per hour winds and high waves, the ship was blown over, water made it down the funnel, knocked out her power, and she could no longer navigate or fight the flooding effectively. Hull and Monaghan were both Farragut-class destroyers, designed to treaty limits 1,500 tons. A single gun turret on Battleship New Jersey is 2,200 tons. By this point in World War II, each of those ships had received about 30% more top weight, an extra 500 tons of radar equipment, anti-aircraft guns, and other stuff. And so they too were top heavy and blew over in the severe storms. While the destroyers bore the brunt of it, the aircraft carriers also suffered severe damage. Light aircraft, whose wings were designed to give them lift, were tied down on deck and in the hangars. However, as these ships rolled and as the wind whipped across their decks, it picked up aircraft and threw them against bulkheads and into each other. These aircraft caught on fire in some cases. In other cases, they killed or wounded sailors. And in some other cases, they were just lost entirely, blown overboard or smashed into other aircraft with such damage that they were completely disabled. By the end of the storm, 196 aircraft had been destroyed, 790 men were killed, and the 3 destroyers had been lost, along with damage to about a dozen other vessels. In particular, aircraft suffered heavily. The battleship and cruiser float planes tended to be lost. The radar systems, the antennas high on the masts, tended to be blown overboard. And any sailors out on deck tended to get the worst of it. A number were blown overboard. Future President Gerald Ford was serving on one of the aircraft carriers, and he himself was almost blown overboard and was involved in a major firefighting effort on USS Monterey. Eventually, Halsey ordered all of the ships to break off and make their own best course, which typically involves pointing your bow into the storm, so you're going bow into the waves as opposed to letting the waves hit you broadside and knocking you over. Many ships, including the destroyers, had already done this well in advance of him issuing the order. The next morning, as damage reports started to come in, Halsey ordered Third Fleet to return to the anchorage at Ulithi for repairs. One ship that didn't follow those orders was the destroyer escort Tabarer. Barely 1,000 tons, she was one of the smaller vessels with Third Fleet. She had been damaged during the storm. Her entire mast had been blown overboard. But she came across sailors in the water and started to rescue them. She was the first vessel to pick up sailors. And even though Halsey had ordered all ships to return to Ulithi, she stayed on station for days, picking up survivors, until eventually relieved by other destroyers. Another destroyer that participated in the search and rescue was USS the Sullivans, which is preserved as a museum ship today in Buffalo. To get an idea of Tabarer's size, go up to Albany to see USS Slater, which recently had significant work done on her own mast. If you live further south, USS Stewart in Galveston might be an option for you. Because of the damage suffered to the fleet, a court of inquiry was held, and it was determined that although Halsey made a bad decision, that no action should be taken to censor him in any way. This wasn't the only time that an event like this happened. About 6 months later, in June of 1945, Halsey had again resumed command of the Big Blue Fleet, converting it from 5th Fleet to 3rd Fleet, and again sailed through a typhoon, this time Typhoon Connie. After 2 major incidents like this, the U.S. military actually set up a joint weather station in the Central Pacific to predict future storms. The second storm was not nearly the same magnitude, and it didn't sink any ships. It did cause damage and wash men overboard and caused the loss of over 70 aircraft, nearly the entire air group of a single fleet carrier. And after this, a second court of inquiry was held, and this time it was recommended that Halsey be removed from command. Admiral Nimitz stepped in and cited Halsey's stellar war record up to this point and left him in command. A third typhoon would hit the United States Navy during World War II. A couple months later, in October 45, while invasion forces in Buckner Bay on Okinawa were preparing for the invasion of Japan. Several ships in the anchorage there were blown ashore and declared total losses. Japan also suffered from typhoons, being another major Pacific Fleet power, and in the pre-war years went through what was called the Fourth Fleet Incident, in which a number of their modern ships were found to have severe defects when exposed to bad weather. Today we're in Battleship New Jersey's chart house, one deck above where Halsey spent most of that night. This is where Battleship New Jersey plotted her course during the night of December 17th and 18th. It's also where they kept the deck log records. We have an educational activity here on the Battleship where we look at the deck log reports and oral histories from a number of sailors involved in Typhoon Cobra on a couple of different ships. If you're interested in that, check the description below. Also in the description below, you can find a link to our GoFundMe campaign. If you like what we do and want to support the museum and specifically our YouTube channel, that's a great place to leave us a donation. The museum does also receive operating support from the New Jersey Department of State. Have you ever been through a Pacific typhoon? Let us know in the comments section down below. Now remember to like, share, and subscribe. We try to put out new content several times a week, and that way you'll get notified when we do. Thanks for watching.